Welcome inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams. This week, having a very specific talent can lead to a dream job. It's how cartoonist John Rose got his foot in the door to draw the comic strip Snuffy Smith.
I picked up the phone and the voice on the other end said, "John, this is Fred Laswell." Word for word, he said, "I got the packet of samples that you sent me, and I really like the way you draw big noses."
There are do's and don'ts for treating poison ivy. This is a don't.
Well, you can get poison ivy rash in the winter, even in the dead of winter, from contacting the plant.
And a young old-time musician wants to save her family's lost ballads.
Said come home, baby said come home. Well, if I live till...
You'll hear these stories and more this week inside Appalachia.
Support for Inside Appalachia is provided by the West Virginia Lottery, where your ticket does more than you think. When you play, you help students succeed. Since 1986, $4.1 billion has been generated to fund education. When you play, West Virginia students and partners like West Virginia Public Broadcasting win.
The following is an Encore episode. Welcome inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams. Like it or not, the hillbilly stereotype still permeates American pop culture. It's been used to degrade and shame folks in the mountains. But there are gentler versions, like Snuffy Smith, the long-running comic strip character who still appears in newspapers. Although these days, it's easier to find Snuffy online. He originally started out as a supporting character in his own comic strip, which first launched in 1919 when Billy DeBet created Barney Google. Artist Fred Laswell was brought in during the 30s to create Snuffy Smith and his friends. And now the strip is written and drawn by John Rose, who lives in Virginia's Shenandoah Valley. Snuffy Smith traces his roots back to 1934, when he first appeared in Barney Google's then 15-year-old comic strip. So much of our world has changed since then. So how do you keep Snuffy Smith fresh all these decades later?
The world's definitely picked up a lot of speed since 1934. Also, in a lot of ways, folks themselves haven't changed that much, I guess. Like Snuffy, people still love their families. They dodge their chores. They get a little stubborn and dream up small schemes to make their life easier. And all those kind of things have been true in Hoot and Holler since Snuffy's introduction in 1934. I guess I've got a little bit of Snuffy Smith in me. Hopefully you got a little bit of Snuffy Smith in you, and hopefully my readers do too. But as for keeping it fresh, I'll try to bring sometimes new contemporary twists to familiar situations. For example, a few years ago, I had Jughead, Snuffy's nephew Jughead, learn to play the guitar, and he plays the guitar often now. And for example, I had a strip where I had that he wanted to get on American Idol one day. I think Louise was in the middle, and he said something like he wanted to get on American Idol, and Snuffy is on the other side of Louise, and he's resting against his stump asleep, and Louise says something like, here I've got one that wants to get on American Idol while the other remains an idle American. I just try to sometimes bring in contemporary themes, but I always want to stay true to the characters. I don't want to put them in any situations that aren't true to their personalities.
How did you become Snuffy Smith's cartoonist?
I was working as an editorial cartoonist and was a member, I still am a member of the National Cartoonist Society. And we have an annual meeting. And at this meeting, I was talking with a fellow editorial cartoonist, and he told me that he was working as an assistant on a syndicated comic strip. And I didn't really know that comic strip cartoonists used assistants. Ever since I was a child, I've always wanted to be a comic strip cartoonist. And I thought maybe this was a way I could enter the world of comic strip cartooning. So I thought about it. And the first comic strip really that I thought of was Snuffy Smith. I had grown up reading it in my papers in Covington, Virginia. I loved it. I didn't always understand the gags when I was a kid, but I loved the artwork. I didn't know Fred Laswell, who was the longtime cartoonist on the comic strip, but because I was in the National Cartoon Society, I had access to his physical address and phone number. I just did a couple sketches. I did a sample Sunday comic strip. I did some character sketches, and I just mailed it in a package with some of my other work. Fred Laswell was a legend in the comic strip business. He drew this comic strip for over 60 years, and he just had a personality that could light up a room. Like, everybody loved him. He was a true legend. So as a cartoonist, you get a lot of rejection. When I sent that out, this was just a cold call. And when I sent it to him, I thought I might hear a thanks, but no thanks, or I might get a rejection letter of some kind back from him. So I didn't know if I'd hear or not. But about 2 weeks after I mailed him the package, it was a Saturday, it was lunchtime, and I was eating a nutritious lunch of Cocoa Puffs. And the phone rang, and I picked up the phone, and the voice on the other end said, "John, this is Fred Laswell." I kind of like choke on my Cocoa Puffs. I was surprised that he had called, and he said, word for word, he said, "I got the packet of samples that you sent me, and I really like the way you draw big noses." So it ended up, to make a long story short, he hired me as his inking assistant. Basically, he would write the comic strip, he would sketch out the comic strip, and then this was in the days of fax machines, he would fax me his beautiful sketches. Then I would take his sketches and ink those in, scan them into the computer, kind of clean it up a little bit, email it back to him, and then he would, approve it or suggest changes. And so basically, I worked with him like that for about 3.5 years as his inking assistant. I went down to visit him 3 long weekends, kind of over the time that I worked for him. He was in Tampa, Florida, and I was here in Virginia. And he didn't mind at all. He was very into technology. So we talked every day. I worked at the newspaper office during the day. I came home and then worked with him in the evenings. He was a wonderful man, a great teacher, a wonderful mentor to have. In 2001, he passed away, and Kingfisher Syndicate offered me an audition to become the cartoonist on the comic strip. It ended up they liked my work the best, so I've been drawing the comic strip ever since 2001. So that's kind of how I got into working on the strip.
I love that line about the big nose, because Snuffy is definitely known for his big nose. He's known for as a sort of hillbilly stereotype too. He was originally introduced, as you know, as a North Carolina moonshiner, and a lot of people associate him with that and sort of the hillbilly stereotypes and humor that go along with it. So, as a cartoonist working and writing and drawing the strip in 2026, how do you deal with that history and that legacy?
Actually, the moonshining was stopped in the mid 1990s by Fred Laswell before I began assisting on the strip in 1998. I think he did a strip or a series of strips that were referred to as Snuffy's Last Still. Yeah, I think it was 95 or 96. And so since that point, we rarely refer to moonshine or alcohol, except maybe like Snuffy eating rum cake over the holidays or rum cookies, something like that. As far as the mountains and the hillbilly aspect, I try to stay true to the characters' mountain roots and their personalities, because that's who the readers fell in love with a long time ago and who they want to spend time with visiting in the newspapers or on websites every day. I was born in Clifton Forge, Virginia, and I grew up in my young childhood in Covington, Virginia. And we still have a family farm in Allegheny County. So I'm no stranger to like mountain communities. I love them, and I live in them. I live in Virginia, Shenandoah Valley now, and in Harrisonburg. So in my mind, I guess the way I think about it is that Hoot and Holler is definitely a very rural mountain community, but then also kind of like Camp Swampy in Beetle Bailey is a military base. Hoot and Holler itself is sort of a made up, fictional, fun comic strip type mountain community that could be in North Carolina, Kentucky, Virginia, Tennessee, etc. I guess wherever. But that's kind of the way I feel.
What is it about Snuffy that connects with people? It's sort of specific of its time and place, but it's lasted for all these years, and it seems to be popular not just in Appalachia, but around the country. What is it that resonates with people about Snuffy Smith and Hoot and Holler?
I really think the secret is in the characters, which of course most of them were created before me. But I feel like that's the secret to really any successful comic strip is you just want to have characters that readers can relate to, readers have fun with, that readers want to come back and visit with day after day. That's what I've always felt. It's, just this wonderful cast of characters that we have in the strip.
So what's the future for you and Snuffy? Where are you all going from here?
I don't have any plans to retire anytime soon or anything. So I'm bodaciously blessed to get to create this comic strip every day. It's the greatest joy in my professional career, and it continues to be. We just had a brand new book come out, Up to Snuff is the name of it, a comic strip collection. I think it's my biggest collection, but I hope to get to do more books. I hope to get to travel and still get to speak to groups. And yeah, I just hope to keep being able to do what I'm doing and for many more years to come, hopefully in newspapers and on websites and I guess whatever platform comes next.
John Rose, thank you so much for speaking with us here on Inside Appalachia.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm very honored.
John Rose writes and draws Barney Google and Snuffy Smith. You can read it in newspapers or online at Comics Kingdom. It's linked on our website, wvpublic.org. With warmer weather, more folks are spending time in the woods or yards. And it's just a matter of time before some will get into a patch of poison ivy. You can find ways to treat the itchy rash that comes from poison ivy at the pharmacy, but there are plenty of people who still use folk remedies. Folkways reporter Wendy Welch explored the intersection of folk cures and mainstream medicine.
Hello, I'm Mary Beth Babbis. I am a pharmacist and wannabe ethnobotanist. I started learning about plants when I was in 3rd grade from a library book, and I've been loving it ever since.
Hi, I'm Mary Beth Mitchum. I work for George Mason University as an assistant professor and the director of the Master of Public Health program online version, and I like to eat plants.
Babos says when it comes to poison ivy, different people will have different experiences.
So I'm blessed that I only get a mild itchy rash. I've had poison ivy more times than I could count, but for me it's just no worse than a mosquito bite.
Most people, about 8 in 10 who come into contact with poison ivy, develop an itchy series of blisters, but about 15% will have a reaction so severe it resembles chemical burns. Babos describes what's responsible.
There's an oil in the plant that contains a chemical known as urushiol, urushiol, that contains free sulfhydryl groups that form covalent bonds.
In other words, that nasty oil on your skin is going to make you itch, so you need to get it off quickly. The fastest way is to wash with soap and water. But let's say you're in the woods. Then you can also try a few local plants to counteract the urushiol. For instance, jewelweed. It often grows near poison ivy.
Jewelweed is noticeable because it has bright green leaves and it has flowers that are bright orangey yellow.
And it is easy to use immediately.
You can squish up the plant. It has kind of a really juicy stalk and put that juice on the spot that touched the poison ivy, and it may neutralize the urushiol so that you don't get the rash.
Another remedy that's been used for centuries is broadleaf plantain. It grows all over Appalachia, and many gardeners think of it as a weed. You literally pluck a leaf, smash it up, and rub it on. Plantain doesn't die back in winter, which is good, because neither does poison ivy.
Well, you can get poison ivy rash in the winter, even in the dead of winter, from contacting the plant.
There's another plant-based option that works in cold weather. Truly desperate hikers can scrub the affected area with oak leaves or the inside of peeled oak bark or witch hazel bark. Although it works better to make a potion from these ahead of time and carry it with you.
So you would soak the acorns in water and get the liquid off. It'll turn kind of a brownish, and it's that liquid that contains the tannins.
Apply this as soon as you know you've touched poison ivy, or use it as a treatment after the rash appears.
If you already have the rash, the sap from the plant will help with the itch because it's mildly antihistaminic. It works like an antihistamine.
Don't worry about breaking the blisters.
The blisters, if you blister from poison ivy, don't contain urushiol. They will not make the rash spread.
But if the oil is still on your skin, you could spread it by scratching. For most people, Mitchum says a salve would be the best treatment. She walks me through the steps. First, gather fresh jewelweed.
I want it to be very green, very vibrant, and I will gather the leaves, the stems, and the flowers, so all top parts of the plant. Next, I'm going to chop the jewelweed. Once I have chopped the jewelweed and I have enough for about 2/3 of a pint jar, I will stuff it in the pint jar. Typically, I use olive oil, and I will pour that onto the jewelweed that's in the jar, making sure that the oil completely covers the jewelweed and that it is at the top of the jar. Next, I will put a lid on the jar just to make sure that nothing gets in or out while it's simmering.
Put the sealed jar on a dish towel in a crock pot, set on its lowest setting, sitting in an inch or two of water. Simmer for 18 to 24 hours, adding more water as needed.
And once it's cool, I will then pour off the oil and strain out the jewelweed, making sure to extract as much of it as I possibly can. Now's the fun part. For every rough cup of oil, I'm going to add about a teaspoon of beeswax. This will help.
Simmer and stir in a double boiler until the mix is fully blended. Then pour it into a container, put the lid on, and
there you have it, Jewelweed Salve 101.
Native Americans used jewelweed to treat poison ivy, and that knowledge was passed on to early settlers. More recently, academic studies have been conducted supporting many plant-based folk cures. But not everything that's circulated as a potential remedy is a good idea, like bleach.
I would not personally put bleach on my skin. Not only would it burn, it's very caustic and it would cause more damage. It's generally not a good idea to put bleach on your skin anyway.
I think I agree. I don't think I would use bleach on my skin. What do you think about rubbing alcohol topically?
Rubbing alcohol topically might help to remove some of the oil, but I don't know how good it would feel.
Especially if you broke those blisters open, it might burn quite a bit.
MBV, what about butter?
I worry about anything occlusive on irritated skin, so butter might be an issue. I just can't imagine that it would feel good.
And I've heard people using tea bags as a topical applicant.
I don't think that there would be any harm from a tepid tea bag.
Just make sure it's not hot. In fact, cold can be much better, as in frozen.
I do like the concept of jewelweed ice cubes.
That is literally fresh jewelweed, frozen into ice cubes and applied directly to the skin.
That feels so good when you have that itchy rash.
I asked them about the common practice of putting hot water on the rash to kill the itch.
Generally not a good idea to put hot water on a blister.
The Mary Beths offer some final pieces of wisdom when it comes to poison ivy. First,
remember not to burn poison ivy because the oils can be carried in the smoke and damage your lungs.
Next,
you don't want to pee in poison ivy.
No.
Been there, done that. You get the rash in some awkward places.
And that's when you will want steroids, not jewelweed.
In fact, Mitchum says her husband is one of those severe reactors who needs steroids when he gets poison ivy. The gentler cures of the folk world take longer on those chemical burns. She also says it's a good idea when it comes to taking herbal cures to talk to your healthcare professional before you do anything rash.
Did you know?
For Inside Appalachia, in Hayside, Virginia, I'm Wendy Welch.
That you can prevent the crying if you use water and soap. But what if you are out in the wilderness and the one thing that you forget is your water and soap? You trip down a hill and though it's a thrill, you get to the bottom and notice.
That story is part of our Folkways reporting project, which covers arts and culture in our region. For more on folk remedies for poison ivy, visit our website, wvpublic.org. Later in the show, a birthday discovery connects a 19-year-old to her family's musical past. You're Inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams.
Support for Inside Appalachia is provided by the Charleston, West Virginia Convention and Visitors Bureau. Spend your summer in Charleston, where scenic trails and on-the-water adventure meet vibrant arts, culture, and local flavor in the capital city. Begin your adventure at charlestonwv.com.
When we think of livestock, we might think about animals like cattle and sheep. But what about honeybees? Both honeybees and native bee species face challenges, some in common and some not. WMRA's Aisha Pirgo reports.
There are around 4,000 native bee species in the U.S., in addition to honeybee populations that people manage as livestock. Native bees are at risk globally, partially due to the threat from pesticides. But despite some public perceptions, honeybee populations have actually hit record numbers. However, beekeepers are still facing population losses, as well as the ongoing threat of disease.
I believe everybody's got their own set of difficulties with honeybees. We all fight the fact of the varroa mites in the honeybees.
Gerald Pike is the owner and operator of Pike's Apiary in Winchester. He says mites have been around for years and are widespread across the whole industry.
They die from the viruses that the mites actually carry. And those viruses are transmitted to the bees, which weakens their immune system, ultimately leading to the bees' deaths. If a bee flies out to go to get pollen from a plant, and there's another bee that has a mite on it on that plant, you can get a mite on your bees from that.
He says it's similar to having 3 dogs in a yard playing.
They have fleas on them. They transmit kind of by contact, by being around each other and being in the same area.
The goal for beekeepers is to keep the mite levels low enough for the bees to tolerate them. Pike says he tries to do all organic treatments, such as organic acids that won't harm the bees. He also cites lack of nutrition as another issue that they're running into.
If they have little to no forage area for the amount of bees that we need, then they don't get the beneficial nutrients that they need. And where we're building subdivisions where there used to be a field of wildflowers, now there's a subdivision with 30 houses in.
Barry Gibson, who owns Hannah Bee's Apiary in Harrisonburg, also points to mites as an issue. He's also concerned about the use of pesticides by farmers.
But I've talked to a few of them around here, and pretty much they understand and will let us know if they're going to use anything. So I haven't had any pesticide drops or harm.
But concern about the mites is ubiquitous among beekeepers. Ty Ralston is the curator of the State Arboretum of Virginia and research associate professor in the Environmental Sciences Department at the University of Virginia. He says varroa mites are a unique problem for honeybees.
But there are other diseases that they can share with other species. And where looked at it, it appears that the diseases are usually going from honeybees to the other species.
Because honeybees aren't native to America, efforts to keep them healthy can mean fewer resources for native bees. Many of them, including bumblebees, are in steep decline across the country. And Ralston says native species face threats similar to those confronted by cultivated honeybees: pesticides, diseases, and land management changes. His current research focuses on propagating several mason bee species. Mason bees, which are native to North America, get their name from their use of clay to cover their nests. During my visit to Blandy Experimental Farm in Boyce, Virginia, not far from Winchester, Ralston showed me blocks of wood which he referred to as bee hotels.
So those hotels get several species of mason bees, including both non-native ones that are increasing and very common, and native ones which are declining. But we get several species in the bee hotels.
Ralston says these bees are active in the spring.
I will move some of them into the screen house where I have lots of flowers for them, and then let them reproduce in the screen house. And then the next year, I can put them out somewhere else. So it's the same species, but the screen house is a way for me to make more of them.
Even though it might have led to fewer resources for native bee populations, Ralston believes initiatives to save honeybees still brought people's attention to problems that pollinators face.
So it raised a lot of awareness of the importance of pollinators, and it made a lot of awareness of threats of pesticide to pollinators, because honeybees and native bees share the same threats from pesticides. And it also had the benefit of a lot of new plantings of flowers and supports of native wildflower meadows.
Ralston said that honeybees are used commonly in large-scale agriculture, especially in apple orchards, where people often bring them in for apple pollination. But there are native pollinators in the landscape as well, such as squash bees. He said it's an example in which native species are doing most of the pollination of a crop.
And nobody is managing for that crop pollinator. It just exists in the landscape.
He said that squash bees are the main pollinators of squash in Virginia, West Virginia, and Maryland. And he said sometimes people will put honeybees into squash or pumpkin fields, but that honeybees don't like the flowers.
Whereas squash bees are specialists of them, and they will always go to the squash because that's the only thing they collect pollen from.
All of which is a reminder that, in the bee world as elsewhere, it takes a village. In this case, a village of pollinator species that deserve our care. And while these critters are doing their jobs, it's important for us to take care of the landscape in return.
That was Aisha Pirga with WMRA. The Tennessee River runs like an artery through Knoxville, Tennessee. It feeds the recreation and tourism business, and also a rich ecosystem. And some of the river's biggest protectors are really very small. Freshwater mussels. They live on the riverbed and clean up the river, but their numbers have been declining for generations. WUOT's Heather Haley spoke to a group working to protect these creatures.
The Tennessee River in downtown Knoxville may look murky on the surface, but beneath it, scientists and environmental groups are working to restore one of the most important and endangered residents, freshwater mussels.
There used to be billions of mussels in the Tennessee watershed. And by many estimates, quite a few are extinct. So we've gone from billions to probably millions.
Dr. Michael McKinney is a professor of Earth, Environmental, and Planetary Science at the University of Tennessee. He says pollution, habitat loss, and complex reproduction cycles have pushed mussels to the brink.
So they're the most endangered because they have a lot of things working against them. If the water's polluted, they accumulate. It's called bioaccumulation.
That means toxins build up in their bodies over time. McKinney says mussels are natural filter feeders and incredibly efficient ones.
One mussel will filter about a liter per hour, which is a couple of gallons every few hours.
McKinney explains that as they feed, mussels remove sediment, bacteria, heavy metals, and even microplastics, an emerging threat to human health.
The most efficient way to remove those is with mussels. They will, because they're such great filter feeders, they can take that out.
Restoring mussel populations isn't easy. McKinney says hatchery-raised juveniles are released into waterways, but tracking survival has long been a challenge, until now.
My PhD student, Dana Mills, has a new technology where she has active transponder. So for the first time ever, we're now able to locate these mussels.
That research pairs with public outreach led by the nonprofit Keep the Tennessee River Beautiful.
Knoxville has this gorgeous river, but over the years, people have just kind of shifted away from it and helped people realize just this natural asset that we have in our backyard.
As of 2025, the organization has helped remove more than 1 million pounds of trash along the hundreds of miles of river, while also launching educational programs like Adopt a River Mile and Adopt a Mussel.
Our intention and our mission is to educate and inspire others to take action to create a clean, beautiful, healthy Tennessee River for generations to come.
Through the Adopt a Mussel program, supporters receive updates on how much water their mussel filters and help fund restoration research.
One of the problems with mussels is that they're not particularly charismatic. They're often called living rocks, and they're massively underfunded and underappreciated and understudied.
Executive Director Kathleen Gibby sees the value in Dr. McKinney's research of these living rocks for the river's health. She says this adds up to impacting East Tennessee's economy as the river supports billions in recreation spending each year.
Tourism is the number 2 industry in the state of Tennessee. And then also the Tennessee River generates $12 billion just in the recreation industry alone.
From cleaner water to thriving wildlife and recreation, the message is simple. Protecting mussels protects the river and everyone who depends on it.
That was Heather Haley reporting for WUOT. North Carolina musician Murphy Campbell is trying to preserve old ballads from Yancey and Mitchell counties. And some of them come from her family. Blue Ridge Public Radio's Gerard Albert III has more.
It's impossible to listen to Murphy's story without hearing the story of women who came before her. The day we spoke, she came into the studio dressed in her mother's hand-me-down overalls. Her new project is a record of ballads, most of them written by women in her family, that she collected last year on her 19th birthday. She wasn't sure what to do with the songs. Some hadn't been sung in hundreds of years. So she did something she says helps her clear her head, visiting her great-grandparents at the Rebels Creek Cemetery.
And so I drove up the hill and sat on their grave, and I do something kind of silly where, I might talk out loud a little bit, even though I know they're, it's not like they're going to answer me at that moment, but they may in a different way.
Driving down the hill from the cemetery, she visited the church where her great-grandparents used to play music. She had one word stuck in her head, revenant.
And I'm thinking to myself about how strong the culture is to continually appear again and again. And it's like every time we seem to think something is lost and the culture comes right back. It's dead come back. That's what it is. And these ballads that I've collected are not ones that have been sung for a long time.
The songs written by her 2 closest relatives are full of tragic stories. They lived hard lives and filled their music with that pain.
Well, he passed her by one day, and he turned away, not much to say. Well, he passed her by one day to tell his mama goodbye. Well, to tell.
When I started learning about Julie, my closest relative, I was shocked to find out how tragic her life is, how she was an outcast from her community, how she had a child out of wedlock that basically made everyone shame her, and then Clarcy had family tragedy. So these women didn't have a platform, let alone, a life of privilege. And I feel like, if all I have, I can certainly share these ballads that they sang and express them in a way that they didn't get to.
Murphy found these ballads after a tip from a friend in Yancey County. She started noticing the same date over and over again.
I had just this really strange feeling. It felt like they were supposed to come to me at this point in time after, I've been coached up on banjo. I understand old time. I have a great understanding of my family's ancestry and where we're from. And suddenly I have these fragments of music from my family. And it was just an amazing moment. I remember sitting at my computer finding this stuff and just having a chill run down my spine.
Murphy has only been playing banjo for about 3 years. When her brother went off to college, he left his behind. And when Murphy started plucking, she felt like she'd been playing her whole life.
I got a letter, well, from a little lover, said come home, baby said come home. Well, if I live till the 4th of December.
The lyrics to these ballads are timeless and, at times, haunting. Murphy is too. For her, the past is just as real as the present.
With this project, it's been so special because I have these fragments of these people that are dead. But because I have these fragments of their lives, I can't help but feel sometimes that they're present while I'm working on them or sifting through them, or that they've somehow have this guiding hand in the way I've come upon their lives. And I feel very guided by these dead women, you know. I know they're not ghosts that are hanging out in my room or anything, but they live in these songs. They really do.
Well, two loving sisters side and side sing out Tom and sing Andy. And two loving sisters side and side, the boys are bound for me.
Murphy plans to record the ballads this summer inside of a church in Mitchell County.
That was BPR's Gerard Albert III. There's a link to Campbell's performance in the BPR studios on our website, wvpublic.org. Railroad rider Charlie Kastner died in February at the age of 97. Kastner worked for the Public Relations Department at the Louisville and Nashville Railroad and authored several railroad books. In 2024, he co-wrote Big Emma, the story of Louisville and Nashville's M1 284s. The powerful engine hauled passengers, freight, and coal in eastern Kentucky. WEKU's Curtis Tate spoke with one of Kastner's co-authors, Ron Flannery, about the book that was 50 years in the making.
It's been 70 years since the Big Emmas went cold. Also known as M1s, they were the Louisville and Nashville Railroad's last new steam locomotive, built in the 1940s as railroads were converting from coal power to diesel. Unfortunately, none of the 42 M1s were saved from the scrapper's torch. Kastner was an authority on the powerful steam locomotives. He wrote an article on them for Trains magazine in 1972. Co-author Ron Flannery grew up in Appalachia admiring the trains and the men who worked on them. He says he based the Big Emma book on Kastner's article and meticulous notes. Hi, Ron. Tell me about Charlie's writing. He was a storyteller, right?
He was less of a technical guy and more of a folksy kind of person, a writer. He captured a lot of the humanity, the people who designed and built and operated these locomotives, maintained them, tested them. That part of it comes out clearly. That's why I've always admired him so much as a writer. He had saved it was a box about this big of notes, correspondence, drawings, photographs, and stuff when he was doing that article, and it was like a treasure trove.
What did you want to convey to readers?
My intention was to put the reader on the jump seat behind the engineer. And so the engineer is pulling anywhere from 5,000 to a 10,000 ton freight train with one or two engines, depends on what route and everything. It's a little bit of Eastern Kentucky folklore in the way I see it. You're going back in time, and you're literally getting a window and a ride on an operation that was just everyday stuff back then. But it was fascinating whether you worked for the railroad or watched the trains go by. And it's long gone. All that's long gone. But I think so we tried to capture a lot of that history.
The railroad used to be involved in our everyday lives the way it no longer is for most people. Can you talk about that?
The railroad was involved in your personal life in just about every way. You know, your mail was delivered by the train. If you ordered something from Sears and Roebuck, a large item, it came by train. If you were a local merchant, whether at a hardware store, lumber company, appliances, it was delivered by train. Life literally evolved around a small town depot. You had two places where, people, the epicenter of the community might be, if it were a county seat, the courthouse and the railroad depot.
The men who ran the trains, operated these big steam engines, they were outsized figures in the public's imagination, right?
These guys within their community were somebody, that you knew. you knew that these guys, he's an engineer for the LM, so they were somebody, and they were, youngsters like me looked up to these guys like, wow, I can't imagine doing a job like that. I'd love to do that.
That was author Ron Flannery speaking with Curtis Tate for the Appalachia Mid-South Newsroom about the book Big Emma. There are pictures of the Big Emma train in action. We'll have a link on our website. In 2022, nature artist Rosalie Hazlett set out on a trip to illustrate parts of the Appalachian Mountains that often get overlooked. That is, the tiny birds, reptiles, and other critters hiding beneath leaves or up in the trees. Her illustrations came together as Tiny Worlds of the Appalachian Mountains, an artist's journey. The book is full of colorful images and thoughts Hazlett recorded as she spent hours exploring the mountains. Producer Bill Lynch spoke with Hazlett about the book.
To begin with, where did the idea of the project come from?
So I have always had a special affinity for small creatures ever since I got my first hamster when I was 8. I know a lot of kids go through hamster phases. I think mine was a little more intense than most kids. And that kind of spun off into a love for all rodents. And then that love for tiny creatures just kind of continued as I started to learn more about the natural world as I got older. And always wanted to be an artist, but wasn't really sure what to focus on with my art. And it wasn't until probably college and my early 20s that I realized that I could pair art and nature together and I could make work that celebrates the natural world. I started a personal project in 2017 called Tiny Worlds West Virginia. And that was just, my goal was to get better at watercolor and also to learn a little bit about a new creature every month. And in 2021, I got really hyped up on caffeine one day and I took a big walk and I was like, what if I illustrate a whole bunch of tiny critters from the whole Appalachian mountain range? And before I could talk myself down from it, I called the guy that I was going to marry in a week and I was like, can we move out of our apartment and do this huge trip and document all these things? And he was like, yeah, let's do it.
Tell me about your husband. And this is, it's a pretty big leap to do something like this.
Yeah.
So tell me about him.
So he is a water engineer and he works remotely. And so it worked out that he was able to keep working while we were on the road. So we ended up going on this trip. It was 6 months in total, a continuous road trip. Started in Alabama, which is the southernmost part of the Appalachians. And then we ended in Newfoundland, which is the northernmost part in North America. It extends into Scotland. And pretty much every day I would go out and look for interesting small critters, plants, fungi, slime molds, all sorts of stuff. And then I would document my observations with, words and then sketches and take pictures. And then I'd come back to wherever we were staying and I would illustrate what I saw using watercolor.
The trip itself and the places you went, how did you choose them?
So we wanted to take advantage of discounted rates at different rentals. And a lot of them, you have to stay in a place for 2 weeks or longer. We had 6 main base camps all scattered throughout the mountains. We kind of just looked at a map of the Appalachian Mountains and we found these locations that were close to public lands, so national park or something nearby, state parks.
Words and pictures, which was harder to get down?
Oh, words. I've never really thought of myself as a writer. I've been a journaler my whole life. I kept very regular journals from the time I was 5 to 18. Every day is documented. So I always like to record what I saw, but I never really tried to write essays or poems or polished writing. It was always just very casual. And so I kind of leaned into that for this book because I was really psyching myself out about the writing. I originally wanted it to be all illustrations and just the tiniest descriptions of what I saw. And then as I was working on it, I realized that it was becoming disjointed and I needed to tell the story more through words so that people could understand what was happening if they weren't there. On these long hikes, I'd be by myself, so much time in my own head. And so I would just jot down what I was thinking or what I was seeing in my phone in the notes app. And so I basically wrote the whole book while I was walking or sitting on a log because sometimes I'd be tripping over stuff. So I'd stop and I'd sit on a log and I'd write out a observation or the beginning of an essay, and then I'd edit it later. And that actually works really well for this book because I want it to feel like you're walking alongside me through the mountains.
There's definitely a feeling of being in your thoughts. There's a lot of introspection in the book. You kind of gloss over portions of your childhood and even how you got there, which made me interested in your childhood, in your upbringing. You were homeschooled?
Yeah, I was homeschooled till I was about 12. Yeah, and I'm one of 7 kids, so had kind of a weird childhood, lived on a farm, was in a family band. I talk about a lot of these things in the book, and it was a very beautiful childhood, but a little weird.
The family band, tell me just a hair about that, because...
Yeah. So I have, let me see, I don't even know how many older siblings I have. I have 3 older siblings. I've lost count. 3 older siblings. And so by the time I came along, there was already a family band established and they all played instruments. And so it was just kind of a thing that when you're born into my family, you are part of the band. And we were not a big deal, but we did travel around quite a bit to state fairs, festivals, churches, family reunions, and we'd all be standing up there with our old-timey instruments. It was very much like Americana music, so a lot of like John Prine and the Carter family. Yeah, we played lots of tunes together. My dad wrote a lot of the songs too. It was a good time, and it lasted until I was about 14. And I write about that in the book, that I was kind of the demise of the family band because I went to school and my peers found out about the band and they did not think it was cool. So I ruined it. I broke up the band.
Well, this project, what was your favorite part about it?
Oh, well, there's so many things. One of the things that felt really special was just getting to dive deep into a project for a couple of years. So the trip took 6 months. Planning the trip and getting some grants to help pay for the trip and finding a publisher took a full year before we even left. Coming back afterward, I spent a year finishing all the paintings from those reference materials. So I was able just to kind of lose myself in the project, to lose myself in the places. Even after we got home, I had spent so much time in each place and was so present in each place that I was able to access those memories in a way that I haven't been able to before. So I'd be like working on the section about Quebec, and I would see my husband at lunch and I'd be like, he would ask me what I've been up to, and I'd be like, oh, I'm just in the woods of Quebec right now. Like mentally, like I was there because I had so much time in each place, and that was really a treat.
Do you have a favorite critter?
Oh, there's so many good critters. I'll tell you about 2. In Alabama, one of the very first things that we saw was a green anole lizard, and they're sort of like chameleons. They change color based on their temperature and mood. So I saw this little brown lizard on the trail, and it was holding very still, so I was very pleased because usually small critters often, because they don't have a lot of defense mechanisms, they're very speedy. So that's a constant challenge with this book, because I only wanted to include things that I actually saw and got my own pictures of. So I couldn't, even though like hellbender salamanders are so iconic for this area, I didn't see one on the trip, so I couldn't include it. So I was watching this little lizard. It was holding still. I was very happy. And then it dove under a leaf and ate a beetle. It stayed under there for a long time. And so I got curious and I lifted up the leaf and it turned bright green. And I was shook because I did not know that they changed colors. I just thought I was looking at this brown lizard, and then all of a sudden it's this beautiful lime green. So that was a really cool surprise and a lesson in like just watching a critter for a long time will lead to interesting observations. And then the second one I want to talk about is actually an eastern screech owl that I saw after we returned from the trip. So after the 6 months on the road, we came back to the farm that I grew up on, and we lived there for a while. And my goal was just to see this place that I knew so intimately with fresh eyes after the trip. I wondered, after so many months of slow hiking and paying attention, what will I see that I might have missed before? One of the coolest things that I saw right around the farm was an eastern screech owl who lived in a hollow in a tree. And I just stumbled upon this owl one day, and I don't even know how I saw it. It was so camouflaged, but I was just like looking around and saw 2 eyes staring back at me from this hole. And that owl stayed there all winter long. And that's something that they often do to kind of stake their claim for nesting in the spring. That owl kind of became my muse when I got home because it was really easy after seeing all this cool stuff on this long trip to think like, oh, what else is there to see in my home? Like, I know everything. It's less exciting. But then thinking about my owl being there and how like hidden it was and how I wouldn't have found it unless I'd been looking closely made me think like, oh, there's probably so much more here that is yet to discover. And that's been a really nice takeaway is like, it's not always about going elsewhere to find that inspiration, that you can find it in your own backyard.
The book is Tiny Worlds of the Appalachian Mountains, An Artist's Journey by Rosalie Hazlett. Rosalie, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Tiny Worlds of the Appalachian Mountains, An Artist's Journey is available from Mountaineer Books. Since that conversation first aired, Hazlett moved to Elkins, West Virginia, where she opened up a studio and art shop called Meander. Till next time, thanks for joining us as we journey throughout Appalachia. Our theme music is by Matt Jackford. Other music this week was provided by Tim Bing, Dave Odell and Dave Bing, John Blissard, John Ingram, Larry Rader, and Blue Dot Sessions. Bill Lynch is our producer. Abby Neff is our associate producer. Our executive producer is Eric Douglas. Our audio mixer is Patrick Stevens. We had help this week from Folkways editor Chris Julin. You can find us on Instagram @InAppalachia. You can also send us an email to insideappalachia@wvpublic.org. Visit wvpublic.org/InsideAppalachia to subscribe to our newsletter and stream all of our stories. Or look for Inside Appalachia on your favorite podcast app. Inside Appalachia is a production of West Virginia Public Broadcasting.